The plant keeping your great-grandmother alive through 2 world wars is probably rotting in your backyard right now. You might have pulled it up last weekend thinking it was a weed. You might have sprayed it with herbicide. And nobody told you any different because somewhere along the way, the knowledge that made ordinary families self-sufficient simply stopped being passed down. Modern life didn't just replace these plants. It buried them. It convinced an entire generation that healing came in a bottle from a pharmacy and food came wrapped in plastic from a warehouse. And in the process, we lost something that took 10,000 years to build. But here's what this video gives back. 25 plants your great-grandparents knew by name, by smell, by touch, and exactly why they kept them growing. Before we get into it, stick around for number 20, because what the U.S. government did to suppress this plant in the 1950s is something almost no one talks about anymore. And number 25, this one is so powerful that multiple pharmaceutical companies have spent decades trying to synthesize a version of it and still haven't matched the original. If you've ever felt like something important was lost when your grandparents' generation left, that instinct is right. Hit subscribe. Not because it's a button, but because this channel is where people choose to remember what the world decided to forget. Here are 25 forgotten plants your great-grandparents grew to survive, ranked from remarkable to absolutely unforgettable. Number 1. Comfrey. Long before aspirin existed, the ancient Greeks called this plant symphytum from their word meaning to unite. Healers in 400 BCE were packing comfrey root around broken bones and using its pulp on deep wounds. By the Middle Ages, it had spread across every monastery garden in Europe, carried deliberately because no serious herbalist traveled without knowing where to find it. The moment it started disappearing from American gardens was the 1970s, when a wave of pharmaceutical patent filings made plant-based remedies look primitive by comparison. Comfrey didn't vanish because it stopped working. It vanished because it couldn't be owned. Research confirms that comfrey contains allantoin, a compound documented to accelerate cell proliferation and tissue repair. Studies on comfrey root extract have shown measurable reductions in joint and back pain comparable to some pharmaceutical topical treatments. Traditionally, your great-grandmother would have made a comfrey poultice by bruising fresh leaves, wrapping them in cloth, and applying them directly to a sprain, bruise, or swollen joint. Left on overnight, changed in the morning. Comfrey contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids compounds linked to liver damage when consumed internally over time. Use it externally only. Never take it as a tea or tincture. We spent billions developing synthetic anti-inflammatories. This one grew in every kitchen garden for 4,000 years, free of charge. Number 2. Yarrow. The Achilles of Greek mythology was said to have used this plant named Achillea millefolium for exactly that reason, to stop the bleeding of his soldiers' wounds on the battlefield. That story is over 3,000 years old, and it tracks because yarrow has been found packed into the wounds of Bronze Age burial sites from Northern Europe. Somewhere around the early 20th century, the rise of antiseptics and sterile bandaging made yarrow seem unnecessary. Field medicine moved into hospitals, and the plants that lived on battlefields and roadsides were left behind. Studies show yarrow contains compounds including achiltin and flavonoids with documented hemostatic properties, meaning they assist in blood clotting. Research also confirms antimicrobial activity against several common bacteria. In practice, crush fresh yarrow leaves between your palms until they're pulpy, press them directly against a minor cut or wound, and hold firm. This is how it was used on farms before the nearest doctor was 40 miles away. Yarrow can cause photosensitivity in some people and may trigger reactions in those allergic to ragweed or related plants in the Asteraceae family. This plant still grows wild across most of the continental United States right now. The question is whether you'll recognize it when you see it. Number 3. Elderberry. The elder tree appears in the folk medicine records of nearly every culture that encountered it, from Norse healers who called it Hildemor and treated it with reverence, to Native American nations who used the bark, berries, and flowers for different purposes, to European settlers who planted it at the corners of their homesteads as both medicine and protection. Its decline in American use came in the mid-20th century, not because it stopped working, but because it couldn't compete with the marketing budgets of synthetic cold remedies. A generation raised on NyQuil stopped planting elderberry. Their children never learned why it had been planted in the first place. Modern research has validated what those settlers knew instinctively. Studies including randomized controlled trials confirm that elderberry extract significantly reduces the duration and severity of influenza symptoms. The mechanism appears related to flavonoids that bind to and block flu viruses from entering cells. The traditional use is simple. simmer ripe elderberries with water and a little honey into a syrup, strain it, and store it in the refrigerator. 1 tablespoon daily as a preventive during cold season is how it was commonly used. Raw, unripe elderberries contain sambunagrin, a compound that causes nausea and vomiting. Always cook the berries before use. Never consume the leaves or bark. Your grandmother had a name for this. She kept it at the edge of the garden. We forgot to ask her why. Number 4, plantain broadleaf. Not the banana. The weed. The one growing in the cracks of your driveway right now. Platigo major was so widely used by Native American peoples that some tribes called it white man's footprint because it seemed to follow European settlers everywhere they went, sprouting wherever disturbed soil appeared. We stopped using it because we stopped looking at the ground. Somewhere in the post-war suburban expansion, the front lawn became a place for appearance, not survival. Weeds became enemies, and one of the most effective drawing agents and wound plants in the world became a nuisance to be sprayed. Research confirms broadleaf plantain contains aucubin and allantoin compounds with documented anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and tissue-regenerating properties. Studies have shown measurable activity against bacterial strains, including Staphylococcus. Chew a fresh plantain leaf just a few seconds until slightly pulpy and press it against a bee sting, splinter site, or minor infected cut. This is called a spit poultice. It sounds primitive. It works. This plant outlived every empire that discovered it. It's still here, growing through your concrete. Number 5, stinging nettle. The Romans brought stinging nettle with them when they invaded Britain, supposedly rubbing it on their own skin in the cold northern climate to keep their blood circulating. Urtica dioica has been documented in Egyptian medical papyri, in Native American spring tonics, and in the food records of nearly every pre-industrial European culture as one of the first and most important plants of the season. It faded from American use when grocery stores made nutritional scarcity irrelevant. If spinach was available year-round in a bag, why would you risk the sting? What modern research found is striking. Nettle is extraordinarily nutrient-dense, high in iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins A and K. Studies also confirm anti-inflammatory properties that appear beneficial for joint conditions, and research suggests it may support prostate health and reduce allergy symptoms by inhibiting histamine production. To prepare it safely, blanch nettle leaves in boiling water for 2 minutes. This immediately neutralizes the sting. Drain and use exactly like cooked spinach. Your great-grandparents ate this every spring. It was the first green available after a long winter. Raw nettle causes skin irritation and should never be consumed without blanching or drying. Those on blood thinners should consult a doctor before eating large quantities due to high vitamin K content. Most Americans walk past this plant every summer without knowing what it can do. Number 6, garlic, wild and cultivated. Cultivated garlic has been documented in use for at least 5,000 years, appearing in the medical texts of ancient Sumer, in Egyptian papyri prescribing it for over 22 conditions, and in the rations of Greek and Roman soldiers. But the knowledge most Americans lost wasn't that garlic existed. It was how their great-grandparents actually used it medicinally, strategically, and constantly. Garlic fell from serious medicinal use in the early 20th century as Western medicine professionalized. Physicians who once recommended it were seen as backwards. What had been kitchen medicine became kitchen flavor. Research confirms allicin released when garlic is crushed or chopped has broad-spectrum antimicrobial properties. Studies document effectiveness against bacteria, fungi, and viruses. Research also suggests cardiovascular benefits, including modest blood pressure reduction with consistent use. The old-fashioned preparation for infection. Crush a raw clove, let it rest 5 minutes for allicin to form, then consume directly. 1 crushed clove in small spoonful of honey. That was the chest cold remedy in 10 million farmhouses. Garlic thins the blood. High doses can interact with anticoagulant medications. Those scheduled for surgery should discontinue medicinal doses 2 weeks prior. Your grandfather probably ate this without calling it medicine. He just called it dinner. Number 7, calendula. The Egyptians valued Calendula officinalis for its rejuvenating properties. Medieval European healers called it pot marigold and added it to every broth made for the sick. During the American Civil War, field surgeons used calendula poultices on battlefield wounds when no other antiseptic was available. Field reports from that era describe its effectiveness in preventing infection in conditions where almost everything else was failing. The pharmaceutical industry replaced it with synthetic antiseptics in the early 20th century. Calendula was simply too common, too cheap, and too impossible to patent. Research confirms calendula contains triterpenoids and flavonoids with documented anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial activity. Clinical studies have shown calendula preparations effective in treating radiation-induced skin dermatitis. Some hospital protocols now use it for exactly that purpose. The simplest preparation: steep dried calendula petals in olive oil in a warm place for 4 to 6 weeks, strain, and apply directly to dry skin, minor burns, and skin irritation. This is calendula-infused oil, and it is exactly what your great-grandmother made in a mason jar on her windowsill. We built a global skincare industry worth billions and kept quietly putting patented versions of this plant's compounds into the products. Meanwhile, the plant itself costs $2 as seed. Number 8. Red clover. Native to Asia and Northern Europe, but naturalized throughout North America, red clover trifolium pratense was a staple of North American herbalism by the time settlers arrived. Indigenous nations of the Great Plains used it. Eclectic physicians of the 1800s, a respected medical tradition that has since been largely erased from American medical history, used red clover preparations extensively. Its fall from use was direct. The eclectic medical tradition was systematically dismantled in the early 20th century, largely through the influence of the Flexner Report of 1910, which reorganized American medical education around pharmaceutical-based practice. Plant-based remedies were reclassified as folklore. Research has focused significantly on red clover's isoflavones, plant compounds that interact with estrogen receptors in the body. Studies suggest potential benefits for menopausal symptoms, and research indicates possible cholesterol-modulating effects. Traditional use: dried red clover blossoms brewed as a tea, 1 tablespoon of dried flowers per cup of hot water steeped for 15 minutes. This was a daily tonic for women in many households, consumed quietly, shared among neighbors, rarely discussed with doctors. Due to its estrogen-like compounds, red clover should be used with caution by those with hormone-sensitive conditions. It may interact with blood thinners and hormone therapies. This one is still growing across most of the U.S. right now. The question is whether you'll recognize it in the field. Number 9. Lobelia. Here's where the list starts going somewhere most people never reach. Lobelia inflata, also called Indian tobacco, was one of the most important medicinal plants in early American botanical medicine. Samuel Thompson, one of the most widely followed healers of the early 1800s, built his entire practice around it. At its peak, Thompson's system of botanical medicine had hundreds of thousands of followers across the young United States. Then the American Medical Association lobbied to restrict and eventually criminalize its unlicensed use. Thompson was arrested and ultimately acquitted, but the damage was done. Lobelia went from household name to dangerous obscurity in a single generation. Research confirms lobelia contains lobelin, a compound studied for its effects on nicotine receptors, with documented use in smoking cessation research. Studies have also confirmed bronchodilating properties, which explains its traditional use for asthma and respiratory distress. Traditionally, very small amounts of dried lobelia were smoked or brewed as a weak tea to relieve asthma attacks. It relaxed the bronchial passages quickly and reliably in an era before inhalers existed. Lobelia is potent. In large doses, it causes severe vomiting, respiratory depression, and can be fatal. This plant demands extreme caution and respect. Do not self-medicate with it without serious study and guidance. We built a pharmaceutical empire around nicotine replacement therapy. The chemistry behind it was already growing wild in American fields 200 years ago. Number 10. Solomon's seal. The Cherokee, Iroquois, and Ojibwe nations all used Polygonatum Solomon's seal for joint and tendon injuries long before any European herbalist documented it. Chinese medicine records its use going back well over 1,000 years. When European settlers arrived and began developing their own herbal traditions in North America, they noticed that every native culture around them kept this plant close. It faded as physical labor became less common and orthopedic surgeries became more available. Why tend a garden plant for a torn tendon when the hospital could just fix it? But the hospital couldn't always fix it. And even when it could, recovery was brutal. Research has identified steroidal saponins in Solomon's seal root with documented anti-inflammatory activity. Studies suggest the compounds may support connective tissue repair and lubrication of joints, effects that parallel its traditional use almost exactly. The preparation: simmer dried Solomon's seal root in water for 20 minutes to make a strong decoction. Apply as a warm compress to stiff, damaged, or overworked joints. Used consistently over weeks, this was the physical therapy of the pre-industrial farmer. While generally considered safe for external use, internal consumption of Solomon's seal root should be approached carefully. Large internal doses can cause digestive distress. The berries are mildly toxic and should not be consumed. Every civilization that encountered this plant kept it. It outlived the empires that discovered it. And most Americans have never heard its name. Number 11. Motherwort. Leonuris cardiaca. The name says it all. Cardiaca for the heart, Leonuris for lion-hearted strength. This plant was used by Chinese herbalists over 1,000 years ago as a heart tonic. European midwives used it for centuries to calm anxiety and regulate heartbeat during the extreme physical stress of labor. Colonial American women kept it in their gardens specifically because it was known to quiet a racing heart. It disappeared from American use when cardiology became a medical specialty and heart conditions became pharmaceutical territory. The idea that a plant in your garden could support your heart was reclassified as dangerous ignorance. Research confirms motherwort contains leonurin and iridoids with documented cardiovascular effects. Studies show measurable reduction in heart rate with use. Research also confirms mild uterine stimulant properties consistent with its historical use in obstetrics. Traditional use: 1 teaspoon of dried motherwort steep in hot water for 10 minutes, consumed as a bitter tea during periods of anxiety or heart palpitations. The taste is unpleasant. That bitterness tells you something is genuinely bioactive. Due to its uterine-stimulating properties, motherwort is absolutely contraindicated during pregnancy. It can also interact with cardiac medications. Do not use without caution if you are on heart or blood pressure medication. Your great-great-grandmother knew that a racing heart after grief or fright needed a garden, not a pharmacy. That knowledge has a name. It's growing in ditches across America right now. Number 12. Woodbetterny. Stachys botanica was once called the herb of St. Paul in medieval Europe, where it was grown in monastery physic gardens with the same seriousness as anything in a modern hospital pharmacy. An 11th century herbal text listed it as treatment for 47 different conditions, which sounds like superstition until you read what those conditions were: headache, anxiety, digestive distress, nervous exhaustion, the conditions of a body under chronic stress. Woodbetterny vanished from American herbalism as the category of nervous exhaustion itself was redefined. Anxiety became psychiatry. Headaches became neurology. Every symptom got a specialist, a prescription, and a bill. Research confirms woodbetterny contains tannins, glycosides, and alkaloids with documented nervine, that is, nerve-calming activity. Studies suggest it may have mild sedative effects and support digestive function through interaction with the nervous system. Steep 1 teaspoon of dried woodbetterny in hot water for 10 minutes. This was the headache tea, the nerve tea, the I need to sleep tea of 300 years of American herbal practice. It tastes mild. It works quietly. We replace this with $1 trillion pharmaceutical anxiety market. The plant that handled nervous exhaustion for centuries costs almost nothing to grow. Number 13. Boneset. In 1918, the influenza pandemic killed more people in a year than World War I killed in 4. And in American households, particularly in rural areas, the plant that families reached for when fever raged and every bone in the body ached was Eupatorium perfoliatum. Boneset. Named for the sensation it reportedly relieved, the feeling that your bones were trying to break apart from the inside. By the 1940s, this knowledge was almost entirely gone. Antibiotics and antivirals replaced the entire category of fever plants. The infrastructure of home herbalism that had carried this knowledge through generations was abandoned. Research confirms boneset contains sesquiterpene lactones and polysaccharides with documented immune-modulating and anti-inflammatory activity. Studies suggest it may stimulate white blood cell activity during immune response consistent with its historical use during viral illness. The preparation: steep 1 tablespoon of dried boneset herb in 2 cups of hot water for 15 minutes. This was consumed hot to promote sweating during fever, a technique for supporting the body's own immune response rather than suppressing it. Boneset can cause liver toxicity if used in large amounts or over extended periods. Used for acute illness, only not as a daily tonic. The people who survived 1918 in rural America were often the people whose grandmothers still knew which plant to reach for. That's not a small thing. Number 14. Black cohosh. The Algonquin, Iroquois, and Cherokee nations had been using Actaea racemosa black cohosh for centuries before European settlers arrived. They used it for menstrual regulation, labor support, and the symptoms of what we now call menopause. When European settlers adopted it, it became one of the most widely used plants in North American botanical medicine by the 1800s. Its suppression came with the professionalization of obstetrics and gynecology. Women's health moved entirely into the clinical setting. The plants women had shared among themselves for generations were reclassified as dangerous and unscientific. Research shows black cohosh root contains triterpene glycosides with documented activity on hormonal pathways. Multiple clinical studies, some German, where it remains a registered pharmaceutical, confirm its effectiveness in reducing hot flashes and menopausal discomfort. Traditional use: a decoction made from dried black cohosh root, simmered for 20 minutes, strained, and consumed in small doses over several weeks. This is still how it is used in countries where it has never stopped being taken seriously. Black cohosh should not be used by those with liver conditions, as rare cases of hepatotoxicity have been reported. It is also not appropriate during pregnancy. Doses above recommended amounts can cause dizziness and nausea. If you've made it this far, you've probably noticed something. These plants didn't disappear because they stopped working. They disappeared on a schedule, in waves, always around the same time that a synthetic alternative arrived, one that could be patented, priced, and sold. The knowledge that left with your grandparents' generation didn't evaporate. It was replaced. Drop a comment right now. Did your grandmother or great-grandmother use any of these plants? Tell me which one. These stories need to be preserved. Because every comment that names a plant, names a person, names a memory, that's not just engagement. That's documentation. Now let's keep going, because the next section goes even deeper. Number 15, Usnea. This is where most people's botanical knowledge ends. Usnea is a lichen, the gray-green, hair-like growth you've seen hanging from tree branches in damp forests, and it doesn't even look like a plant. But it was used by healers from Pacific Northwest nations, by Chinese physicians over 1,000 years ago, and by European herbalists who called it old man's beard and kept it specifically for respiratory and urinary infections. Usnea disappeared from use because it's hard to cultivate, difficult to standardize, and impossible to package into a pill that anyone would recognize. It fell into the gap between folk remedy and pharmaceutical product. Research confirms Usnea contains usnic acid, one of the most potent naturally occurring antimicrobial compounds identified to date. Studies show activity against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus MRSA at a time when we are desperately searching for new antimicrobial options. Traditional use: a tincture of dried Usnea in alcohol, applied topically to infected wounds or taken in small measured doses for respiratory infection. This was the antibiotic of the forest before antibiotics existed. Usnic acid can be hepatotoxic in concentrated internal doses. Several cases of liver damage have been linked to high-dose Usnea supplements. Use with serious caution internally. External application is generally considered safer. We are facing an antibiotic resistance crisis. The compound our researchers are now rushing to understand has been hanging from tree branches since before we arrived on this continent. Number 16, skullcap. Scutularia lateriflora was used by multiple nations of the eastern woodlands as a ceremonial and medicinal plant before European contact. American eclectic physicians of the 1800s, the same tradition that was dismantled by the Flexner Report, called it one of the most reliable nervines in their pharmacopoeia. It was the nervous system plant for a culture that built everything by hand and lived under the constant pressure of physical survival. When psychiatry emerged as a medical specialty, plants that acted on the nervous system became professionally dangerous for any physician to recommend. They were primitive, unscientific, potentially distracting from real treatment. Research confirms skullcap contains bakelin and other flavonoids with documented anxiolytic, anxiety-reducing effects. Studies have shown measurable reductions in anxiety without the sedation caused by pharmaceutical benzodiazepines. 1 teaspoon of dried skullcap steeped for 10 minutes. That was the nerve tea, the sleep tea, the world is too loud tea. Mild in taste, gentle in action. Used for centuries before the word anxiety was ever a diagnosis. Skullcap has been found to be frequently adulterated in commercial preparations with germander, a related plant that is hepatotoxic. Source carefully. Verify what you're actually buying. The anxiety epidemic in America is real. The knowledge that existed to support the nervous system without pharmaceutical dependency, that's real too. It was here long before either problem existed. Number 17, poke root. Phytolacca americana is a large, dramatic plant dark purple berries on vivid crimson stalks that grows aggressively across the eastern United States. Appalachian healers used it for generations as one of the most powerful lymphatic movers in their tradition. It was in the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, the official compendium of recognized medicines, until 1905. Then it was removed. It was removed not because research found it ineffective, but because effective doses are dangerously close to toxic doses. The margin was too narrow for standardized medicine. And narrow margins mean liability. So it was quietly dropped. Research on pokeroot has identified proteins called pokeweed mitogens that are extraordinary immune stimulants, so potent they are used in laboratory research to activate immune cells. Research has also identified antiviral compounds that have been studied for applications in serious viral illness. Traditional use require experience knowledge, very small doses of pokeroot tincture drops, not spoonfuls used briefly during acute illness with significant lymphatic involvement. This is not casual folk remedy. This is precision botanical medicine. This is the most dangerous plant on this list so far. Pokeroot is toxic. Raw berries, roots, and leaves can be fatal in sufficient quantities. Children have died from pokeberry poisoning. Never use this plant casually. If you use it at all, do so only with experienced guidance and extreme caution. The plants with the most power are almost always the ones that demand the most respect. That's true in nature. It's true everywhere. Number 18, sweet clover. Mellilotus officinalis arrived in North America with European settlers who knew exactly what they were bringing. In Europe, sweet clover had been used for centuries as an anticoagulant to reduce the tendency of blood to clot excessively. Traditional healers used it for varicose veins, swelling, and blood vessel inflammation. It smells like vanilla when dried, and every apothecary in the old country knew it by scent. Its medicinal use faded as pharmaceutical anticoagulants arrived. But here's the connection almost no one knows. The anticoagulant drug warfarin, one of the most widely prescribed blood thinners in the world, was derived directly from a compound in sweet clover. The plant didn't lose to a synthetic competitor. The synthetic competitor was born from the plant. And then the plant was forgotten. Research confirms sweet clover contains coumarin compounds with documented anticoagulant and anti-inflammatory activity. Studies show it reduces venous insufficiency and swelling in the lower legs. Traditional preparation: dried sweet clover flowers brewed as a mild tea and applied as a poultice to swollen, tired legs. This is what farm women used after long days standing quietly without anyone calling it medicine. Sweet clover interacts directly with blood-thinning medications. Do not use if you are on anticoagulant therapy. Moldy sweet clover produces dicumarol, a highly toxic compound. Never use any part of the plant that shows signs of mold. We spent billions developing a synthetic version of something that grew wild and free. Then we forgot where the idea came from. Number 19, California poppy. Not the opium poppy. Not even close. Eschscholzia californica, the state flower of California, is a completely separate species with no opioid compounds. But because it looks vaguely similar to its dangerous relative, it carries an unfair reputation. Native Californian peoples used it for centuries as a gentle sedative, a pain reliever, and a treatment for toothache. Spanish missionaries documented its use. Early California settlers adopted it immediately. It faded from general use somewhere in the post-World War II era of pharmaceutical expansion, when anything that touched pain or sleep became the domain of prescriptions, and anything that looked like it might be related to illegal plants was approached with suspicion. Research confirms California poppy contains alkaloids, including californidine and protopine, with documented sedative and anxiolytic effects. Studies show mild analgesic activity. The key word is mild. This is not a narcotic. It is a gentle nervine with a legal, non-addictive profile. The traditional preparation is a simple tincture whole plant including roots and flowers, steeped in alcohol or a mild tea used before sleep. This was the bedtime medicine of California's early inhabitants for 10,000 years. Most people don't know the difference between this plant and the one on the DEA's list. That confusion cost a generation of Americans access to a gentle, effective, and completely legal plant ally. Number 20, chaparral. In the 1950s and 1960s, Chaparralaria tridentata was one of the most discussed plants in American alternative medicine circles. Indigenous peoples of the Sonoran Desert had used it for centuries as a broad-spectrum antimicrobial, antiviral, and antifungal agent. It was the medicine chest of the desert used for everything from toothache to respiratory infection to cancer-adjacent conditions. Then came the FDA intervention of the 1990s. Following reports of liver toxicity in a small number of supplement users, the FDA issued warnings and pressured manufacturers to pull chaparral products from shelves. Many companies complied. The research into its potential benefits was effectively halted. The conversation stopped. Research shows chaparral contains nordohydroguaretic acid NDGA, one of the most potent antioxidant compounds ever measured. Studies confirm antimicrobial and antiviral activity. Some researchers have argued that the liver toxicity cases were related to adulterated products or extreme overuse, not the plant itself at normal doses. The debate has never been resolved and has never been funded for resolution. Traditional use among desert-dwelling peoples, a tea made from dried leaves, consumed in small amounts for acute illness. Not as a daily tonic. Not in large quantities. Chaparral can cause liver toxicity, particularly at high doses or with prolonged use. The FDA warning stands. This plant should be approached with serious research and medical consultation before any use. Internal use is particularly risky. The U.S. government moved against this plant during a decade when pharmaceutical companies were aggressively competing in the antiviral and antioxidant markets. Draw your own conclusions. Number 21. Turkey tail mushroom. Technically a fungus Trametes versicolor, but your great-grandparents didn't have a taxonomy problem. They had a log in the backyard and a grandmother who knew what grew on it. Turkey tail has been used in Chinese medicine as yunji for over 2,000 years, specifically as an immune tonic. Pacific Northwest indigenous peoples used it as a medicinal tea. Japanese researchers have been studying it intensely since the 1960s. In America, it was dismissed because it wasn't a pharmaceutical. It wasn't patentable. It was just a bracket fungus on a dead tree. Research has gone far beyond folklore. Polysaccharide K-PSK extracted from turkey tail is a licensed drug in Japan and has been used alongside cancer chemotherapy for decades. American NIH-funded research, including a study by Dr. Carolyn Zick at the University of Michigan, confirmed turkey tail's immunological activity in cancer patients. Traditional preparation: dried turkey tail pieces simmered as a decoction for at least 30 minutes, strained, and consumed as a daily immune tea. That's what it's been for 2,000 years. This plant outlived every empire that discovered it. It's growing on dead wood in every forest in North America right now, doing exactly what it has always done. Number 22. Bloodroot. Sanguinaria canadensis stains everything it touches a vivid, startling red. That color is the alkaloid sanguinarine, and for generations, eastern woodland peoples used this plant precisely because that compound was so biologically active. The Iroquois used it ceremonially. Settlers adopted it for dental conditions, skin growths, and respiratory infection. It appeared in the U.S. pharmacopoeia for decades. Its disappearance was abrupt and had nothing to do with its effectiveness. In the late 1980s, research connected sanguinarine to a condition called oral leukoplakia when it was used in high concentrations in commercial toothpastes. Manufacturers pulled it. The entire plant's reputation collapsed alongside the product. Research confirms sanguinarine has potent antimicrobial and antibiofilm properties. Some studies suggest activity against certain cancer cell lines in laboratory settings. The compound is still used in veterinary dentistry. It simply vanished from human applications after the toothpaste incident. Traditional use was topical and minimal, the root juice applied carefully to skin lesions and warts, or a very dilute wash for gum conditions. Precision, not saturation. Bloodroot is highly toxic internally. It causes severe vomiting and potentially organ damage at even moderate doses. External use requires care. The red sap can cause tissue damage if applied repeatedly or heavily. This is an expert plant. We found the compound worth patenting in a toothpaste. Then blamed the plant when we used it wrong. Number 23. Osha root. Ligusticum porteri grows in the high mountain meadows of the Rocky Mountains and the American Southwest. It smells like celery crossed with something wilder, almost feral. The Navajo called it bear medicine because bears, returning from hibernation, were observed seeking out and rolling in the plant. That observation became a teaching. If the bear knows, pay attention. Osha root was used by multiple Pueblo and Plains nations for respiratory conditions, immune support, and high-altitude adaptation. Spanish colonial healers adopted it. Mountain communities in the Southwest kept it as a staple through the 19th century. It faded because it doesn't grow everywhere, can't be farmed easily, and can't be turned into a product that survives a global supply chain. It belongs to a geography. Modern medicine doesn't have room for plants that won't travel. Research confirms Osha root contains phthalides and other compounds with documented antimicrobial and bronchodilating properties. Studies suggest it supports respiratory function particularly relevant in high-altitude environments or during viral respiratory illness. Traditional preparation: roots simmered as a strong tea or tinctured in alcohol, used at the onset of respiratory illness. Taste is strong, aromatic, warming. Your body knows something is happening. Osha root can be confused with poison hemlock and water hemlock, both lethal plants with similar-looking roots and foliage. Never harvest Osha from the wild unless you are absolutely certain of identification. This is a plant that requires an expert before it requires a recipe. The bear knew this medicine before any human did. The bear still knows it. We are the ones who forgot. Number 24, Angelica. Angelica archangelica received its name from a 17th century legend. An angel appeared in a plague year dream and revealed this plant as a cure. The legend is folklore. The plant's history is not. It was used by Northern European, Scandinavian, and Russian healing traditions for centuries as an antibacterial, a digestive tonic, and a warming medicine for the extreme cold of northern climates. Sami people in the Arctic used it as a food crop when nothing else could survive. In America, it arrived with European settlers and found a home in cool, damp gardens. By the 20th century, it had been reduced to a flavoring agent, the green candy used to decorate cakes. The medicine became decoration. The knowledge evaporated. Research confirms Angelica contains furanocoumarins and volatile oils with documented antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and smooth, muscle-relaxing properties. Studies suggest benefits for digestive spasm and respiratory conditions. Traditional use: dried roots steeped as a tea for digestive distress and respiratory, catarrh, the heavy, congested feeling that came with cold weather illness. Warming, aromatic, and in a completely different category from the green candy you've seen on grocery store shelves. Angelica root causes significant photosensitivity. Skin exposed to sunlight after contact with the plant or its preparations can blister severely. Also, do not confuse with water hemlock, which shares similar habitat and appearance. Pregnant women should avoid use, as it contains uterine-stimulating compounds. We took one of the most medicinally complex plants in Northern European tradition and turned it into candy. That might be the saddest sentence in this entire video. Number 25, American ginseng. Panax quinquefolius. Save this one. Write it down. This is the plant that multiple pharmaceutical companies have spent decades and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to fully synthesize. They haven't done it. Not completely. Not in a way that replicates what the whole root does. American ginseng was used by dozens of North American indigenous nations for centuries as a general tonic, an immune support, a cognitive enhancer, and a recovery plant after serious illness. Chinese merchants were trading for it by the early 1700s, recognizing it as superior in certain properties to Asian ginseng. The trade was so lucrative that it nearly wiped out the American population of the plant within 2 centuries. Suppression isn't the right word here. Exploitation is. American ginseng didn't fade because it was forgotten. It was harvested nearly to extinction because it was so obviously valuable that the knowledge became a commercial secret rather than a community inheritance. Research on American ginseng is extensive. Studies confirm ginsenoside's unique compounds exclusive to the Panax genus with documented effects on immune modulation, cognitive function, blood sugar regulation, and recovery from physical stress. Research suggests ginsenosides interact with pathways involved in inflammation and cellular resilience in ways that no single synthetic compound has yet replicated. Traditional preparation: the dried roots simmered slowly for at least 40 minutes in water, a patience that modern culture has almost entirely lost. The longer it simmers, the deeper the extraction. This was how it was prepared by every nation that kept it. Slow, deliberate, respectful. American ginseng interacts with blood thinners and diabetes medications. It can affect blood pressure and should be used with caution by those with cardiovascular conditions. Harvest wild American ginseng only where legal. In many states, it is protected, and for good reason. If you grow your own, know that it takes 5 to 7 years for a root to mature. Patience is built into this plant. This plant outlived the colonization of an entire continent. It nearly went extinct because it was too valuable to share. The pharmaceutical industry is still trying to replicate what a root that takes 7 years to grow simply does on its own. That is what the word irreplaceable means. Here is what 25 plants tell you, taken together. The knowledge your great-grandparents carried wasn't superstition dressed up in garden boots. It was a complete system tested across generations, refined across cultures, passed hand to hand through every war, famine, and winter. That system was not lost. It was dismantled, methodically, by market forces that needed you to need something they were selling. Every plant on this list was abandoned at a moment of corporate convenience. And every one of them is still here, still growing, still working, still waiting, because biology doesn't respond to market trends. Here is your challenge. Pick one plant from this list. Just one. Find out if it grows within 20 miles of where you're standing. Learn to identify it. Not to use it tomorrow, but to know it. Because the first step your great-grandparents took wasn't buying a product. It was paying attention to what was already there. If this video changed how you think about what was lost, it matters more than you know. Now tell me in the comments, did your grandmother grow any of these plants and did she know what they were for, or did she just grow them out of habit? Those are two very different answers, and both of them matter. And if you want to keep going deeper into the plants, the history, the knowledge that's still out there to be recovered, subscribe. Not for the algorithm. For the same reason your great-grandmother kept seeds through every winter, because you don't know which year you'll need them. The knowledge didn't die. It's just been waiting for someone to ask the right questions.